Jackson Rourke studied the contract on his data pad, eyes narrowing at the sum listed at the bottom. Double his usual rate, with a substantial completion bonus. His potential client was either desperate or expecting trouble of the lethal variety. Probably both. 6 months of protection duty for an Irie noble? He looked up at Maddox, his contact at the Interstellar Security Bureau. Those ice veins rarely leave their territories, let alone hire humans for anything. Maddox shrugged, his cybernetic eye whirring as it adjusted focus. Political situation on their homeworld's gone sideways. Lady Varen made some powerful enemies. Details are classified, but the threat's real enough that they're willing to hire the best non-Irie protection available. And that's me, Jackson said flatly, running a hand through his close-cropped dark hair. At 42, he carried the evidence of his former military career and subsequent protection work in the network of scars across his tanned skin and the perpetual vigilance in his deep-set gray eyes. 15 successful high-risk extractions. Never lost a client. Maddox tapped the data pad. That's why you're getting offered this insane payday. Jackson scanned the terms again. Why not use their own security? Internal affair. Can't trust their own. You know how these royal types operate. Jackson did know. Politics among powerful families always turned deadly, regardless of species. He'd spent enough time cleaning up after such conflicts to recognize the patterns. Fine, he finally said, pressing his thumb to the contract. But I run security my way. No interference. Wouldn't expect anything less. Maddox smiled, revealing gold-plated teeth. Transport leaves in 3 hours. Dock 7. The Irie diplomatic vessel gleamed like polished pearl against the industrial dullness of the spaceport. Jackson boarded with nothing but his tactical duffel and weapons case. Traveling light was a professional habit he'd never abandoned. A slender Irie attendant with alabaster skin and silver blue eyes met him at the airlock. This way, Guardian Rourke. The voice was melodic but utterly devoid of inflection. The Irie were infamous for their emotional control. Not suppression, they would insist optimization. Emotions were inefficient distractions to be managed, cataloged, and ultimately mastered. Their society valued logic, order, and precision above all else. They were also known for their striking appearance. Tall, graceful beings with skin tones ranging from pearl white to soft lavender, intricate patterns of bioluminescent markings, and eyes that seemed to hold the colors of distant nebulae. Jackson was led through pristine corridors to a meeting room where 2 Irie stood in conversation. They turned as he entered, their movements fluid and synchronized like dancers. Honored Guardian. The older male addressed him with a formal bow. I am Ambassador Theron. We appreciate your prompt arrival. Jackson nodded curtly, his attention shifting to the woman beside the ambassador. She stood nearly as tall as Jackson's 6'2" frame, with a regal bearing that seemed almost artificial in its perfection. Her skin held a subtle lavender hue, with luminescent markings tracing elegant patterns along her temples and disappearing beneath her high-collared garment. Her hair, pulled back in an elaborate arrangement, was the color of starlight, silver with hints of blue. But it was her eyes that held him, deep violet irises with subtle rings of silver, revealing nothing yet seeming to observe everything. Lady Varen, the ambassador, introduced her. Third scion of House Lyrian. She acknowledged him with the slightest inclination of her head. Guardian Rourke. Her voice was like cool water over stones, smooth, clear, and utterly controlled. Jackson had protected politicians, celebrities, and royalty from a dozen worlds, but something about her perfect composure made him instantly wary. People without visible emotions were unpredictable in crisis situations. We depart immediately, she continued. The ambassador has provided all necessary details regarding the threats against my person. I'll need more than a briefing, Jackson countered, meeting her gaze directly. Threats, enemies, your habits, vulnerabilities, skills. I need to know everything if I'm going to keep you alive. A flicker of something, surprise, perhaps, crossed her features before vanishing so quickly he might have imagined it. I assure you, Guardian, I am not helpless, she replied, and I am capable of following security protocols. Good, he said, because my first protocol is we're not using official transport. Too predictable. Unacceptable, Ambassador Theron interjected. Lady Varen's safety is my responsibility now, Jackson cut him off. My methods have kept high-value targets alive when everyone wanted them dead. That's why you're paying me what you are. Lady Varen studied him for a long moment before turning to the ambassador. Guardian Rourke's reasoning is sound. We will proceed according to his plan. The ambassador's mouth tightened, but he bowed in acquiescence. Less than 20 minutes later, they were aboard Jackson's personal vessel, the Wayfarer, a modified mid-range cruiser with military-grade shields and an unassuming exterior that attracted little attention. As they cleared the spaceport, proximity alarms blared. Incoming craft, attack vector, Jackson called out, hands flying over the controls. Seems your enemies didn't waste time. Lady Varen moved to the co-pilot seat with surprising efficiency. 3 vessels. Unmarked. Definitely not Irie design. Jackson glanced at her as he executed an evasive maneuver. Told you official transport was a bad idea. So it appears, she replied, perfectly steady even as the ship jerked violently beneath them. The first shots flashed past their viewport, and Jackson sent the Wayfarer into a steep dive, rolling beneath the attacking ships. This is why I get paid the big credits, he muttered, activating the ship's countermeasures. Lady Varen gripped the console as another barrage rocked the ship. Guardian Rourke, she said, her voice still frustratingly calm. I believe this arrangement may prove more eventful than anticipated. His lips curved into a grim smile. 6 months of protecting an Ice Queen alien noble suddenly stretched before him like an eternity. Just another day at the office, Your Highness, he replied, as the stars blurred into streaks of light around them. Just another day. 3 weeks into their journey, Jackson and Varen had established a routine of constant movement. Never more than 2 days in one location, always using backdoor connections and cash transactions to stay off the grid. Currently, they occupied a small cabin on Talaran, a mining outpost on the fringes of regulated space. Rain battered the metal roof as Jackson checked the perimeter sensors for the 3rd time that evening. Outside, the mining colony's few lights glowed dimly through the downpour. The sensors are functioning correctly, Varen noted from her position at the comm station. Your repeated checks are unnecessary. Jackson continued his work without looking up. Habit keeps people alive. In the weeks since their narrow escape from the ambush, he'd been surprised by her adaptability. She'd accepted cramped quarters, rough accommodations, and bland synthesized food without complaint. She maintained her composure even when they'd had to crawl through maintenance tunnels to avoid a security sweep on Gareth Station. You've been overly vigilant since the incident on Nyx, she observed. The incident had been a close call, mercenaries tracking them to a fuel depot. Jackson had taken a graze to his shoulder before eliminating the threat. Getting shot tends to keep me alert, he replied dryly. Varen rose from her station and approached him, her movements fluid and silent. Even in the practical clothing she now wore, fitted black pants and a simple gray tunic, she maintained that innate grace all Irie possessed. Allow me to examine the wound. Before he could object, her cool fingers touched his shoulder. Her touch was clinical, but Jackson found himself unsettled by the proximity. She smelled faintly of something alien and sweet, like night-blooming flowers. Healing properly, she concluded, stepping back. Your physiology is remarkably resilient. Human advantage. We break easily but heal quickly. Something almost like curiosity flickered across her features. You speak of your species with such detachment. Professional hazard, he shrugged. When you fought alongside and against enough different species, you start seeing the patterns. Thunder rumbled outside as silence fell between them. Jackson noticed her gaze lingering on the viewport, watching the storm with unusual intensity. We don't have weather like this on Aer, she said suddenly. Our climate is regulated. Of course it is, Jackson muttered. You disapprove of our methods. Not my place to approve or disapprove. Different species, different ways. Varen tilted her head slightly. Yet you hold an opinion nonetheless. Jackson finished his check and faced her directly. Controlling weather is one thing. Controlling emotions is another. We don't control emotions, Guardian Rourke. We understand them. Process them efficiently. Efficiently, he repeated, an edge entering his voice. Is that what you call it? Her luminescent markings pulsed subtly, the first involuntary reaction he'd observed from her. You believe our ways make us less? I think suppressing natural responses makes for dangerous blind spots. Emotions evolved for a reason, they're warning systems. And yet they cloud judgment, lead to errors. They also drive intuition, creativity, connection. He moved to the small kitchen unit. Coffee. She accepted the mug he offered, their fingers brushing momentarily. You've protected others of my kind before? 2 previous clients. Both diplomats. And your assessment? Jackson hesitated, then decided honesty served his purpose better than diplomacy. Brilliant. Disciplined. Utterly unprepared for chaos. Instead of the dismissal he expected, Varen considered his words thoughtfully. Perhaps there is truth in that observation. Our society values order above all, which makes you predictable to your enemies. Lightning flashed, illuminating her face in harsh white light. For a moment, her perfect composure seemed to waver. I've been considering that possibility, she admitted quietly. Our traditional responses failed to anticipate this threat. The admission surprised him. Is that why you hired outside help? Someone unpredictable? Yes. Her violet eyes met his directly. Someone whose patterns they cannot anticipate. The directness of her gaze was unsettling. Jackson had assumed she viewed him as a necessary tool, effective but crude. This suggestion of respect was unexpected. Well, he said, turning back to the security panel, being unpredictable is about to pay off. We're moving again. Tonight. The sensors show no threat. Exactly. We've been here too long without incident. Either we've lost them, or they've found us and are waiting, she finished, immediately gathering her few possessions. Where next? Jackson allowed himself a small smile. Somewhere they'd never expect an Irie noble to hide. As they slipped away under cover of the storm, Jackson realized that somewhere in the past 3 weeks, their dynamic had shifted. They'd become a team as still distant, still professional, but with a growing understanding that survival would require trust. And trust, he knew from experience, was just a step away from something far more complicated. This is your idea of a hiding place? Varen asked as they stepped into the small dwelling nestled among towering trees. The uninhabited moon of Elora was a wilderness preserve, its lush forests and crystal lakes untouched by colonization. Off-grid research station, Jackson explained, activating the power systems. Used by xenobotanists seasonally. Currently empty. Sunlight streamed through large windows, illuminating the simple but comfortable interior. A main living area with basic furnishings, a small kitchen, and 2 sleeping quarters. Rustic by any standard, but luxurious compared to their recent accommodations. No communication signals, no regular traffic, natural camouflage, he continued. We can stay here a few weeks. Let the trail go cold. For the first time in the 2 months they'd been on the run, Varen seemed to relax fractionally. She moved to a window, watching as a flock of iridescent avian creatures soared past. It's beautiful, she said softly. Jackson paused in unpacking supplies. It was the first time he'd heard genuine appreciation in her voice. Thought you might like actual trees after all those space stations and mining outposts. She turned to him with a questioning look. You selected this location based on aesthetic considerations? Partly, he admitted. Security's still priority, but there's no reason to be miserable while we wait. Over the following days, a subtle shift occurred in their interactions. With no immediate threats to evade, their conversations extended beyond security protocols and evasion strategies. Jackson learned that Varen was a scholar of comparative xenohistory, a surprising field for an Irie noble. She, in turn, showed unexpected interest in his experiences across the galaxy. On the 7th day, Jackson returned from setting perimeter alerts to find Varen outside, standing barefoot in a small stream that ran near the cabin. Her eyes were closed, the afternoon sunlight playing across her face. The water temperature fluctuates with depth and current, she said without opening her eyes. So many sensations simultaneously. Jackson leaned against a tree, observing her. Don't you have rivers on air? Carefully regulated ones. Nothing so chaotic. She opened her eyes, their violet depths reflecting the sky above. This variance would be considered inefficient. Some of the best things in life are inefficient, he replied with a half-smile. That evening, as they shared a meal of local fruits and protein rations, Varen broke their comfortable silence. Earlier, when you spoke of inefficiency, what did you mean by best things? Jackson considered the question. Sunsets. Music. Good food. Laughter. He paused, then added, love. Physical pleasure and aesthetic appreciation, she nodded clinically. No, he shook his head. Not just pleasure. Connection. Meaning. She regarded him with genuine curiosity. These emotions, they're important to you. They're what make life worth living, he answered honestly. Otherwise, we're just surviving. Varen's bioluminescent markings pulsed softly as she processed his words. You've experienced love? The question caught him off guard. Yes, he finally said. A long time ago. What happened? She died. Civil war on Baris 4. He hadn't spoken of Marina in years. I couldn't save her. Yet you continue to feel. Not a choice. Just how it works. The next morning, they hiked to a nearby ridge overlooking a vast valley. Forest stretched endlessly below, occasionally broken by the silver ribbon of a river or the sparkle of a lake. The double sunrise painted everything in gold and amber light. Jackson watched Varen's reaction as she took in the vista. Her perfect composure had slipped, replaced by something close to wonder. It's overwhelming, she whispered. Good overwhelming? She nodded, her markings pulsing with intensity. I was taught to process such responses efficiently, to categorize and contain them. But this, she gestured at the landscape, this defies categorization. That's the point, Jackson said gently. Some things aren't meant to be contained. Their return journey was interrupted by a sudden storm. Racing through the downpour, they reached the cabin drenched and breathless. Inside, Varen stood motionless in the center of the room, water streaming from her hair and clothes. You're shivering, Jackson noted with concern. An involuntary physiological response, she said, but her voice held a note of wonder. I can feel each drop of water, the temperature change, the acceleration of my pulse. Jackson handed her a blanket, their fingers brushing. This time, neither pulled away immediately. Later that night, after another close call with a predatory creature that had approached their cabin, they sat before the heating unit, the adrenaline of danger still lingering in their systems. You faced that creature without hesitation, Varen observed, even knowing the risk. That's the job, he shrugged. No, she shook her head. It's more. You feel everything so deeply. How do you bear it? Jackson looked at her, seeing not the cold alien noble he'd first met, but a woman on the edge of discovery. You don't bear it, he said softly. You live it. She met his gaze, and for the first time, he saw raw emotion in her eyes, confusion, wonder, and something that might have been longing. Teach me, she whispered. In that moment, something fundamental shifted between them. The professional boundaries that had defined their relationship began to dissolve, replaced by a connection neither had anticipated. As the night deepened around their small shelter, they remained talking in low voices, a human teaching an Irie how to embrace what her culture had taught her to control, the glorious chaos of truly feeling alive. Days on the secluded moon blended into weeks as Jackson watched Varen transform. Small changes at first, lingering to feel the morning sun on her face, closing her eyes to listen to rainfall, smiling spontaneously at the antics of local wildlife. Her movements became less measured, her expressions more genuine. One evening, as they prepared dinner together, Varen laughed. A sound so unexpected and melodious that Jackson nearly dropped the utensil he was holding. What? She asked, noticing his startled expression. Nothing, he smiled. Just don't think I've heard you laugh before. A hint of color touched her cheeks. It's not encouraged in formal Irie society. Considered an undisciplined response. Their loss, Jackson said quietly. Their eyes met across the small kitchen space, and something electric passed between them. Varen was the first to look away, her luminescent markings pulsing rapidly. Later that night, they sat before the dwelling's large windows, watching twin moons rise over the forest. The silence between them felt charged, weighted with unspoken awareness. May I ask you something personal? Varen finally said. Jackson nodded, his gaze still on the moons. When you lost someone you loved, how did you continue? He turned to her, surprised by the directness of the question. One day at a time. It changes you, but you adapt. The pain doesn't destroy you. It feels like it might, he admitted. But humans are resilient that way. Your capacity for emotion is regarded as a weakness by my people, she said softly. But I'm beginning to think it may be your greatest strength. Without thinking, Jackson reached out and traced one of the luminescent markings that curved along her temple. Varen inhaled sharply, but didn't pull away. These glow brighter when you feel something strongly, he observed. Yes, her voice was barely above a whisper. They betray what our faces try to conceal. His fingers lingered, trailing down to her jawline. What are they betraying now? Instead of answering, she leaned forward and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was tentative at first, then deepened with growing urgency. When they finally parted, her markings were blazing with light. I shouldn't, she breathed, but her hands remained on his shoulders. No, he agreed, even as he drew her closer. Probably not. Her next kiss answered any remaining doubts. That night, Varen discovered sensations her disciplined upbringing had never prepared her for. Jackson's hands and lips awakened nerve endings long suppressed by eerie emotional control. Each touch was a revelation, each shared breath a defiance of her culture's strictures. For Jackson, the experience transcended physical pleasure. There was something profound in being the one to guide her through these discoveries, to witness her abandonment of lifelong restraint. Afterward, lying together in the silver moonlight that spilled across the bed, Varen's markings pulsed in rhythm with her heartbeat. "I never understood," she whispered against his chest. "We're taught that physical intimacy is a biological function, to be approached with clinical detachment." Jackson's fingers traced patterns along her spine. "And now I understand why your poets write of stars colliding." She raised herself on one elbow to look at him. "Is it always like this?" He smiled, touching her cheek. "No, this is something else entirely." Morning brought no regrets, only a deeper connection that continued to grow in the days that followed. Their time became measured not by the passing of days, but by moments of discovery. Varen's delight in the taste of wild berries, the shared warmth of bodies entwined beneath the stars, conversations that stretched into the night as she questioned everything she'd been taught about emotion and connection. "My people would consider me contaminated," she said one afternoon as they walked along the lakeshore, hand in hand. Too compromised by emotion to function properly in society. "Is that what you feel? Contaminated?" She stopped, turning to face him. "I feel alive. For the first time." Her markings pulsed with the truth of her words. "You've shown me what it means to truly experience life, not just observe it." Jackson pulled her close, struck again by how much had changed. The Ice Queen he'd first met was gone, replaced by this vibrant, feeling woman who met passion with passion, who laughed and wept with equal intensity. "When this is over," he began, but she placed a finger against his lips. "Don't," she whispered. "Not yet." Reality intruded 3 days later. Their perimeter alarm activated just before dawn, jerking them both from sleep. "Multiple signatures," Jackson said, checking the security display. "Professional formation. They found us." Varen moved with decisive efficiency, gathering only essential items. "How many?" "At least 8. Heavily armed." They'd prepared for this possibility, had an evacuation plan ready. But as they made their way to the hidden shuttle, the forest erupted with weapons fire. Jackson pushed Varen behind a massive tree trunk, returning fire at their attackers. Fighting alongside each other, they moved by unspoken coordination, her precise shots complementing his tactical experience. When a blast caught Jackson in the side, Varen didn't hesitate or freeze. She dragged him to cover, applied emergency medical measures, then took his weapon to continue their defense. Not bad for an Ice Queen. He managed through gritted teeth as she eliminated 2 attackers with perfect shots. Her eyes flashed with fierce determination. "I had an excellent teacher." They reached the shuttle bloodied but alive, escaping into the atmosphere as explosions consumed their former sanctuary. As stars replaced sky, Varen tended Jackson's wound with gentle hands. "Why risk yourself for me?" she asked quietly. Jackson looked at her, at the woman who had transformed from client to lover to something he had no words for. "Because you're not a contract anymore," he said simply. Her markings glowed with understanding as she leaned down to kiss him. Whatever came next, there would be no return to what they had been before. The universe had shifted, rearranging itself around the gravity of what had grown between them. The small trading vessel limped to Port Meridian under false registration. 6 months after their first meeting, Jackson and Varen had arrived at a crossroads. The political upheaval on Aer had stabilized with the defeat of the faction targeting Varen. According to their sources, she could safely return to her position, her duties, her regulated existence. The contract was complete. They'd taken temporary quarters in the bustling spaceport while Jackson's ship underwent repairs. Neither had spoken of what would come next. "Ambassador Kalen has arranged secure transport," Varen said, setting down her communication device. "They will arrive in 2 standard days." Jackson continued cleaning his weapon, his face carefully neutral. "Good. That gives us time to review security protocols for your return." "Jackson," she said softly. He looked up, struck again by how much she'd changed. Her hair, once rigidly styled, now fell in loose waves around her shoulders. Her posture remained elegant, but had lost its artificial stiffness. Most telling were her eyes, now expressive, alive with the emotions she no longer tried to suppress. We need to discuss what happens when I leave, she continued. You return to your position. I find another contract. His tone was professional, detached. Standard procedure. Is that what you want? The question hung between them. In their months together, they'd shared everything: bodies, thoughts, fears, hopes. They built something neither had expected, something that defied the boundaries between their worlds. What I want doesn't matter, he finally said. You have responsibilities. A position in your society. A society that would expect me to purge these emotions. To return to what I was. Jackson set his weapon aside and crossed to where she stood. His hand cupped her face, thumb tracing the luminescent markings that no longer concealed her feelings. Could you? He asked quietly. Go back to not feeling? Her markings pulsed with the intensity of her response. It would be like dying. He pulled her against him, breathing in her scent, memorizing the feel of her in his arms. Then don't. My family will disown you. Yes. They stood together in silence, the enormity of the choice before them settling around their shoulders. I need to think, Varen whispered against his chest. Walk with me. They ventured into the spaceport's merchant district, a cacophony of sights, sounds, and smells from 100 different worlds. Vendors hawked exotic wares, spacers traded stories in crowded cantinas. Creatures of all descriptions mingled in the controlled chaos of commerce. Jackson watched Varen take it all in, her eyes wide with wonder rather than the clinical detachment she'd have shown 6 months earlier. They stopped to sample strange fruits, lingered to listen to an alien musician, laughed together at the antics of a street performer. I used to observe such scenes as cultural phenomena to be catalogued, she mused. Now I experience them. And which do you prefer? He asked, already knowing the answer. Her smile was his response, radiant and unrestrained. As evening approached, they found themselves in a quiet observation deck overlooking the spaceport. Ships of all sizes departed into the darkening sky, pinpricks of light joining the emerging stars. You could come with me, Varen said suddenly. To Ayer. Jackson shook his head. I'd be an oddity at best, a corrupting influence at worst. Then I'll stay, she decided, her voice strengthening with conviction. With you. He turned to her, searching her face. Your family, your position, cannot compare to what I've found. Her hands framed his face. You showed me how to live, Jackson. How could I choose anything else? Their kiss was interrupted by the high-pitched whine of a disruptor being charged. How touching, came a cold voice. They turned to find 3 armed figures blocking their exit. The leader, an irie male with formal military insignia, stepped forward. Lady Varen, the High Council has deemed you compromised by foreign influence, he stated without emotion. I am tasked with your retrieval and his elimination. The other assassins raised their weapons, but Jackson had already pushed Varen behind a structural column, drawing his concealed blaster in one fluid motion. Still trying to kill your own people, he called out, discharging a shot that forced their attackers to scatter. Some things never change. Jackson, they're wearing deflection armor, Varen warned, her own weapon ready. Standard military issue. Then we aim for the gaps, he replied grimly. What followed was a desperate firefight through the now deserted observation deck. Fighting as one, they moved with practiced coordination, covering each other, communicating with gestures and glances, predicting each other's movements. When Jackson saw the assassin leader taking aim at Varen from a flanking position, he didn't hesitate. He threw himself into the line of fire, taking the blast meant for her. Pain exploded in his chest as he fell, but he still managed to fire one perfect shot that found its mark. Varen's anguished cry was the last thing he heard before darkness claimed him. He awoke to the sensation of cool fingers against his face and the soft glow of bioluminescent markings in the dimness. Varen leaned over him, her eyes red-rimmed but dry. Welcome back, she whispered. Jackson tried to sit up, wincing at the pain in his chest. How long? 3 days. She helped him adjust. Emergency medical intervention saved you. The assassins? Eliminated. Her voice was matter-of-fact. I contacted Ambassador Kalen. He's identified the faction responsible, hardliners who feared the changes my return might bring. Changes? She smiled slightly. They believed I would advocate for emotional liberation after my time among humans. Would you have? Yes. She took his hand, her markings pulsing with quiet intensity. I still will, but not from within. Understanding dawned. You've decided. I have. She interlaced their fingers. My place is no longer on air. Perhaps someday they'll be ready for what I've learned, but until then. Until then, he prompted. The galaxy is vast, she said, her eyes holding his. Full of wonders I've only begun to experience. I find I need a guide. Jackson pulled her down beside him, careful of his healing wound. Happens I know someone who might be available for that contract. Not a contract, she corrected softly. A choice. As their lips met, Jackson knew she was right. What had begun as duty had transformed into something neither of them had expected, a connection that transcended their differences, that had awakened her heart and healed his. Outside their viewport, stars beckoned with infinite possibilities. Somewhere out there, they would forge a path together, not as protector and charge, not as human and Irie, but as two beings who had found in each other something worth risking everything for. Where shall we go first? She asked, nestled against him. Jackson smiled, gathering her closer. Wherever we want. We've got all the time in the world. Her markings glowed with contentment as they held each other, watching the stars that would guide their journey. For Varen, a noble woman who had discovered passion in the arms of her protector. For Jackson, a soldier who had found purpose in the awakening of her heart. Together they had defied planets, traditions, and expectations, proving that across the vast distances of space, the most powerful force wasn't duty or logic or even survival. It was love.